Venice, La Dominante, Queen of the Adriatic, the city of water canals, bridges and mosques. Although built on a swamp surrounded by sea, Venice proved itself to be one of the most influential cities in the history of the Mediterranean region, dominating with its traders and warships, but also with its culture and architectural beauty. Now, although the city is past its greater times and is slowly going underwater, Venice remains a very popular tourist destination, being crowned with titles such as undoubtedly the most beautiful city built by man. And it's hard to argue with that, even though, from the satellite view, the city looks like... The history of Venice starts with the end of the Roman Empire. When the Eternal City was facing its dawn, the Apennine Peninsula was under constant invasion from barbaric tribes, and most of its citizens were trying to escape to more hidden and protected corners of Italy. Fleeing in the early 5th century from the Visigoths, and some 50 years later from the Huns, some refugees decided to escape into the lagoons at the tip of the Adriatic Sea. You can't but admire the resolve of these people to stay as far away from Germans and throat singers as possible, so they decided to stay in the lagoon and founded the city of Venice. The name is derived from the ancient Veneti people, who inhabited the region in the 10th century before Christ. Officially, the city of Venice was under the administration of the Eastern Roman Empire, namely under the Exarchate of Ravenna, but Ravenna and Venice were connected only by sea routes, so with Venetians' isolation came increasing autonomy, when finally, in 726, the Exarch was killed in a rebellion against the Byzantine Empire. Which was very convenient, since at about this time the people of Venice started electing their own independent leader called the Doge, which is an equivalent of the English Duke in the Venetian dialect. This also put the foundation stone of the Republic of Venice, which would exist through 117 Doges until 1797, when a particular not-so-short guy entered and finally conquered Venice, putting an end to its independence. But until then, Venice was one of the most important trading cities in the Mediterranean basin, mainly because of its geographical position, but also because of all the benefits and exemptions offered by its sovereign, the Byzantine Emperor, to the Venetian traders. There was hardly anything else to do in the lagoon except trading. Thus, Venice developed a very efficient maritime industry, raising its wealth, power and influence in the region. When the Byzantine Empire tried to withdraw all the trading benefits, Venetians looked at their big fleet of galleys, realized that they don't have to ask permission from anyone and can trade however they want, and started a series of raids on the coastlines and islands of the Eastern Roman Empire. The beef with the Basilisk was so intense that Venice even built a fleet that was used in the Fourth Crusade, in which the city of Constantinople was partly destroyed and looted. Another interesting part of Venetian history is the patron saint of the city, Saint Mark. During a storm, some Venetian traders took shelter in the city of Alexandria, which was then under the control of the Muslims. When they found out that the church where the remains of Mark the Evangelist was going to be destroyed, they smuggled the body of the saint and covered it with pork, so as not to be searched by the Muslim customs when leaving Alexandria. Saint Mark became the protector of the city, and his symbol, the winged lion, also became a symbol of Venice. The lion decorates the red and golden flag of Venice, which has quite an unusual design, having 6 fringes that protect the central section from damage caused by wind, but also represent the original 6 districts of Venice called Sestiere: Cannaregio, Castello, San Marco, Dorsoduro, San Polo and San Croce. As one of the dominating maritime powers in the Mediterranean Sea, it was inevitable for the city of Venice to start borrowing new ideas and knowledge from the cultures it was trading with, namely the Byzantine and Islamic cultures. This is prominently visible in the architecture of the city, which combines the Italic Gothic and Renaissance styles with Oriental architectural elements, and one of the best ways to see the range of all the styles is to take a boat through the biggest water traffic corridor in the city, the Grand Canal. Penetrating through Venice, it makes a large S shape through the center, touching every sestiere except Castello. Having a length of almost 4 kilometers and being up to 90 meters wide, the canal stretches from the railway station to St. Mark's Square, so you can take a vaporetti straight to the main attraction right after getting off the train. Along the banks of the canal, there are more than 170 buildings in all styles, from Gothic to Renaissance to Baroque to Neoclassical, dating from the 30th century to the 18th century. The canal is crossed only by 4 bridges, and until the 19th century the Rialto Bridge was the only one, so if you were a pedestrian peasant without a boat or immunity to disease-infected lagoon water, you had to walk half of the city to get on the other side. In any case, this magnificent bridge connects the San Polo and San Marco Sestieri, and it started its existence as a wooden bridge in 1255. And then it was burned in a revolt in 1410. And then it collapsed under the wave of a crowd rushing to see the wedding of San Marquise. And then it collapsed again in 1524. Finally, a decision was taken to build the bridge in stone, and after 64 years the construction began. It was similar to the wooden version, 2 ramps leading up to a central portico, and since it was much more sturdier than its predecessors, both sides of the bridge are filled with rows of shops because no public space should be wasted. As I have said, at the end of the Grand Canal, the tourists are greeted by the Piazzetta San Marco, which is a small square that is connected to the south with the main San Marco Piazza, together making the most important public square in Venice. Several places of interest are adjacent to the square, the most prominent being St. Mark's Basilica and the Doge's Palace. St. Mark's Basilica, being the most important one, is the church of the Catholic Patriarchate of Venice. Its construction started almost 1 millennium ago, in 1063, and was built after the model of the Church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople. That's why the exterior of the building shows influences of Byzantine, Romanesque, Gothic and even Islamic styles. To express the Republic's wealth and power, the original brick facade was later spoiled with various columns, reliefs and sculptures looted from the churches and palaces of Constantinople as a result of Venetians participating in the Fourth Crusade. The biggest devious leak is, of course, the 4 bronze horses stolen from the Hippodrome of Constantinople. The horses on the church were later replaced by replicas in 1980 due to originals being damaged by air pollution, but the bronze ones can still be seen inside the church. On the left side of the church, facing the small square of St. Mark, proudly stands the Doge's Palace, the palace where the Doge lived. And even though from a distance the palace looks like a glorified shoebox, the facade of the palace is overly decorated with Venetian Gothic columns, galleries and ogee arches at the first floors, and with a beautiful carpet-like mosaic on the top. Originally, the palace was a fortress, meant to protect the Doge in case of an invasion, but over time Venice got so cool and confident that the fortress became more of a projection of wealth. On the east part of the palace, on the other side of a small canal, there is a prison, and it's connected from the interrogation room from inside the palace by a white stone enclosed bridge called the Bridge of Sighs. Its name comes from the romantic suggestion that the prisoners would sigh at the final view of beautiful Venice through the window before being taken to the cells. On the other side of the canal lies Santa Maria della Salute, or Saint Mary of Health, which is a Roman Catholic church located in the Dorsoduro Sestiere at the end of the Grand Canal, being visible from the Piazza San Marco. In the summer of 1630, a wave of plague assaulted Venice, killing over a third of its population, 46,000 people. At first, the authorities tried solving the problem with literal thoughts and prayers, displaying sacraments to several saints in their related churches. When this surprisingly failed to ameliorate the situation, it was decided to raise a whole church not to some mere plague saint, but to one and only Virgin Mary, Our Lady of Health. So, in 1631 began the construction of the Basilica di Santa Maria della Salute. Built on a platform made of 1,000,000 wooden piles, the church is an octagonal building with 2 domes and a pair of bell towers at the back. Its facade, as well as the interior, was designed in the Baroque style and is decorated with the statues of the 4 evangelists, as well as of the Virgin Mary, which stands on the top of the main entrance, guarding the people who built the church in her name. Maybe you will ask, well, if this church is so cool, why did you film it only from behind? Well, at the time of the visit, the front facade was covered due to renovation work. Interestingly enough, the facade was covered with an ad for an exhibition that was happening nearby about The Line, one of the most controversial and dystopic urban projects ever. Yeah, let's build a giant line of steel and glass in the middle of one of the hottest places on the planet. What next? Building a city on wood poles impaled into a swan. On the opposite corner of the island, there is a church of similar beauty but of a more edgy style. Basilica dei Santi Giovanni e Paolo, a church designed in the Italian Gothic style and located in Costello Sestiere. This beauty of red bricks and a pinch of marble was built in the 15th century and is the principal Dominican church in Venice. You know, the guys from the order that started naming themselves the Hounds of God because of a pun in their name. In 1246, one night, Doge Jacopo Tiepolo dreamt about a flock of white doves flying over the swamplands where the church will be located. In the morning, he put two and two together, took the hint, and donated the swamplands to the Dominican order, and starting from the 15th century, when the church was completed, all of the funeral services of Venice's doges were held here. Interestingly enough, the basilica is dedicated to John and Paul, not the apostles, but to some two obscure martyrs. And yes, Giovanni is Italian for John. On the right side of the church there is the Scuola Grande di San Marco, a confraternity built at the dawn of the 16th century in the style of its times, Renaissance classicism. This literal frat house, which now is the city's hospital, pleases the eye with its white and blue marble facade, decorated with Byzantine-style arches and niches, the 3D optical illusion archways and portals on the ground floor, and, of course, a statue of a winged lion with a Bible, in case you forgot after whom this scuola is named. The delicate classical architecture of the scuola really stands out near the brutal, tall, red and Gothic exterior of the basilica. A similar pair of churches can be seen in the center of San Polo Sestiere, where the Gothic Basilica di Santa Maria dei Frari and the Renaissance Church of St. Roch stand. Both are astounding and grandiose architectural monuments, but they don't have a really fascinating history, and the Frari looks very similar to the previous basilica. Same red bricks, similarly decorated marble entrances, similar big round windows over it. If you've seen one, you've seen them all. On the east side of the city, in the Castello Sestiere, lies the Venetian Arsenal, a complex formerly used for the assembling of trading and military ships. Its construction started at the beginning of the 12th century, and when it was finished, it became the largest industrial complex in Europe long before the Industrial Revolution. It spans an area of 45 hectares, or 84 football fields, occupying about 15% of the entire city. Here, the ships were produced with the speed of a Chinese smartphone factory that runs on child labor. The Arsenal Navy owned a forest in the Montello Hills of Veneto, the place where the wood supply came. Then, there were different areas of the arsenal that each produced a particular ship part or other maritime implement, such as munitions, rope, the sails, or the masts. These parts could then be assembled into a fully functioning ship in less than a day. At the peak of its productivity, the arsenal employed around 16,000 people who could produce nearly a ship per day. Nowadays, the arsenal complex was modernized and repurposed to serve as the operations center for Venice's Mose project, which is a flood defense system intended to protect the lagoon from tidal flooding. Also, apparently, it is still a military zone, so that's why there is no drone footage of Arsenal either, as I was not eager to find out what is the fine for that too. Venice is also the city where the first Jewish ghetto was formed, in Cannaregio district, on the north side of the island. Jews in Europe didn't quite have a lot of fun during the Middle Ages. And not only in Europe, and certainly not only in Middle Ages, and this includes Venice in the 16th century, when the Doge Leonardo Loredan and the city senate decreed the creation of the Venetian ghetto, where 923 Jews out of the total 160,000 inhabitants were segregated in part of the city which was connected only by two bridges that were only open during the day. The ghetto separation ended only almost 300 years later with the occupation of Venice by Napoleon. Now, the Venetian Jewish community counts about 450 people, although only a few members live in the ghetto since the area has, ironically, become expensive. Still, it is an interesting place to visit where one can see the combination of Venetian and Jewish cultures through its memorials, Hebrew inscriptions and the people living here. It is also a very pleasant place to be, since it is not as crowded because many tourists usually overlook this attraction. Of course, these are not the only places to visit in the city. Usually, while just wandering aimlessly on the streets of Venice, you'll shortly find yourself on a small square with cute restaurants and a grandiose church on the side, or stumble upon some cool landmark like the Contarini del Bavolo staircase, Acqua Alta Library, Care Zonico Museum, or even, if you're lucky, the Bridge of Tits. But also don't forget to just admire the more common things of the city, like the beautiful facades of houses, cats, the small canals, random art expositions all over the city, cats, random museums expositions all over the city, more cats, and, of course, the common life of the locals, especially in the weekdays. Overall, a beautiful city flooded with history, art and tourists. Hurry up and visit it before it gets literally flooded.